The Academe is now, for all intents and purposes, acting like a distinct class of people who see themselves entirely above and separate from the rest of us plebs. But it also wants it both ways. It wants to act as a separate class and have influence, but at the same time wants to be shielded from the consequences of that. This is why, over 1 year since I made the video Abandon Universities, not only I still do stand by everything I said, but I would like to take the opportunity to apologize for being way too moderate back then. Some universities don't just need to be abandoned, they need helicopter rides. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Gee, that was an extremist intro, wasn't it? Anyway, I've been reading a lot about the insanity in the Academe lately, so I thought I would incorporate it into a larger rant combined with practical politics advices. This might come out slightly more extreme than I wanted to, but that's because my tolerance for insanity shrank in the last 14 months or so. But seriously, there is an increasing reason to believe that helicopter rides for some academics is very humane. I mean, when academics tweet about killing off entire races of people or demanding the president be hanged or engaging in other forms of advocation for murder or genocide and all in explicit terms, what do you do with such people? And things will get worse before they'll get any better. And have been getting worse since I made that unusually extremist video on universities last year. Since the last year, the academics have finally noticed that the plebs have started to pay attention to the vast amount of insane content that they put out there, and have also noticed that the plebs tend not to like it, especially when it comes from academics who live on the hard-earned dollars of the taxpayers. Because like it or not, most of the academics, especially in Europe, but also in North America, are, at the end of the day, welfare whores. They don't exactly produce anything of value, because if they had, then there would be a lot of private voluntary funding for their work, and there is, but not for those in the useless departments. But instead of being grateful that the plebs are working hard so they can have the time to think about the big ideas, they turn around and blame the people that pay for their salaries for their own problems. Listen to this segment from a House Oversight Committee testimony on free speech suppression in college campuses.
Nothing that anyone might say today should undermine the critical role that colleges and universities play in American society. I've spent almost 40 years working at institutions as a faculty member and administrator, promoting the value of a liberal arts education. Faculty members need to hold their colleagues accountable. The problems we've seen on campuses are not, I'm confident, supported by the vast number of faculty members. But most faculty have opted to remain silent, to censor themselves, and therefore they've ceded control of their institutions to a small but vocal minority. This silence is understandable. Speaking out distracts people from their important work of teaching and scholarship, while often bringing them into conflict with their colleagues. Asking faculty to encourage civil discussion and to celebrate a range of voices and perspectives is asking a great deal of them, more than we see in our political discourse. But if diverse opinions are not celebrated on campuses, where we're supposed to be trafficking in ideas, I doubt they'll find any welcoming environment. When we shut out voices, we shut out ideas, and serious consequences ensue. Part of the problem on campuses, I believe, stems from a rise in the belief that all knowledge is socially constructed and that there are no absolute truths, or the concept of postmodernism, as it is known in academic circles. Why has this idea made a comeback now? One possibility is that the relentless disparagement many have leveled on disciplines in the humanities, arts, and social sciences has led to a backlash. It shouldn't be surprising that when practitioners see their fields portrayed as useless by those who promote only STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, they push back, and the resistance often manifests itself as antipathy towards science. When we marginalize certain voices, we all lose. We need to recognize that disciplines each bring something important to our understanding of the world. Privileging some fields over others yields a fragmented and incomplete picture. I say this as a scientist. As important as science is, it certainly isn't all there is.
Really, mate? So the sliding into the full insanity of postmodernism amongst the vast majority of academics in the useless departments is our fault? Really? This is why I'm losing patience for virtually all intellectuals, because they really don't get it. For every Jordan Peterson or Janice Fiamengo out there, there are 5,000 communist loons. And to blame this on the society or on other factors than the academic's lunacy itself can only make sense if you're saying that the society should have started up the rotors a long time ago. Yeah, in that sense, it is the society's fault. But otherwise, no. The fault is yours and yours alone, and everybody knows it except you. And that's a problem. I don't remember who said it. It could have been George Orwell or someone else. But there are things that are so inept and so stupid that only an intellectual could have come up with them. And to come in front of the public and say that all knowledge is valid and that privileging some of it over the other is to get an incomplete picture of reality is one of those things. It's something so preposterous, so inept, and so deluded that only an intellectual like Michael Zimmerman could have come up with. I mean, come on. Zimmerman here is showing what Thomas Sowell aptly called the vulgar pride of intellectuals, or what Nassim Taleb called the intellectual yet idiot, which is the behavior of certain intellectuals who believe that just because they're fantastic in one field, that suddenly means that they should be listened to authoritatively when they opine on other fields. And it is a widespread disease among intellectuals. You don't see me, for instance, opining on chemistry, and that's because I know for a fact that I suck at chemistry, and I am thus horribly unqualified to speak about it beyond a 12th grade level of knowledge, and perhaps even less than that. Zimmerman is a biologist who in 1995 authored a book called Science, Non-Science, and Nonsense, Approaching Environmental Literacy. So he wants us to listen to him while he explains authoritatively what's science and what's nonsense, which is fair, at least in part. Yet he is somehow expecting that he is not supposed to listen when we will tell him that no, feminist glaciology is not science, or that the argument that statues represent white supremacy is really disdainful bullshit. The point I'm trying to make here is that the vast majority of credentialed intellectuals have entirely lost touch with the wider world. And to make things worse, for them that is, even when they do realize this, their response is to double down on the nonsense and their isolation and insulation. Don't believe me? Read a bit from the Chronicles of Higher Education, and we'll read that. The Chronicles of Higher Education is the propaganda circle jerk organ of the so-called intelligentsia. So, Chronicles of Higher Education. If there is an organized outrage machine, we need an organized response. So, no need for self-reflection or self-doubt, the good old scientific skepticism. No. You see, the problem is the plebs, not us, the intellectuals. We academics are always right, even when we call for genocide. This is really what these people believe. Let me read it to you in their own words. Quote, anticipating the possibility of an internet mob harassing a professor because of something he or she said can seem a bit like prepping for a lightning bolt. Yes, some people get struck by lightning, but more often than not, it feels like a freak occurrence. It's easily avoided, some might say, but by not flying a kite in the thunderstorm. But these strikes appear to have grown more common in recent months. Sure, a professor who calls for the hanging of the president, Trump, should expect blowback, but it's hard to argue that's the same for, say, a professor who writes a lengthy essay on classical statues and how they have been co-opted by the modern white supremacist movement. Hard to argue? How about on the grounds that it is a lie? or on the grounds that the taxpayers should not be paying for this, or perhaps on the grounds that the author is a militant communist. It's not hard to argue at all. But this is the problem with these types of schmucks. They genuinely believe that they deserve full protection from any consequences of their ideas, while at the same time arguing for the removal of any protections of any kind for those who oppose them. It's not hard to argue at all why most people think you are the enemy of the free world, because you legitimately are. These attacks also come at a time when a majority of Republican or right-leaning Americans harbor a negative view of the nation's higher education institutions. Yeah, so, a significant minority of leftists also believe you are all full of it. The vast majority of the public disagrees with you. And the situation is not really that different in Europe either. It's just that Europe isn't full of physically enclosed campuses, so the students are compelled by physical necessity to make contact with daily real life. So bad ideas are much harder to retain. Anyway, I'll get back to this point towards the end of the video. Let's read some more. Quote, some professors argue it is no longer a matter of the internet mob comes to the door, but when. The greatest thing our profession can learn is that things have changed, says Tracy McMillan Cottom, assistant professor of sociology at Virginia Commonwealth University, who recently wrote an essay describing methods of dealing with online outrage. If there's an organized outrage machine, we need an organized response. By the time they're writing about you on a website or publishing your address or something, it's probably too late. In her essay, Ms. Cottom offers a variety of tips for academics to help handle an internet pillorying, including asking the IT department to set up a separate email account or creating an email template for responding to outside inquiries for comment. And while an individual's options might be limited, other professors offered pointers on how to support a colleague under fire. Ms. Cottom said it's natural to pull away from a professor embroiled in a controversy, but that it may be the least productive course. We're afraid of being associated with the crisis, Ms. Cottom said. Rarely are these attacks about a person. The worst thing we can do is isolate our colleague. It's a fear tactic. The real goal here is to isolate and shame people. Now, the reason I find this funny is because she is somewhat correct, but not for the reasons she's mentioning. Yes, it is true that the goal is to isolate and shame people. It's an Alinsky tactic. Rule number 13, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Cut off the support network and isolate the target from sympathy. Go after people and not institutions, because people hurt faster than institutions. And I'm absolutely thrilled that the non-left has started using this against the academics. Quite frankly, I think it is not used often enough. And there isn't a better target than academics. These people have been creating Alinsky activists for decades. Turning the tables against them could not come faster. Anyway, and then this article goes on to defend the guy who promotes genocide. Not joking. Quote, instead of saying nothing, colleagues should reach out to those at the center of media maelstorms. Ms. Cottom suggested, even if you don't agree with their statements. Solidarity, she said, doesn't mean agreeing with everything someone else said. And for the professors who might be receiving hundreds of emails, Ms. Cottom said sometimes the kindest thing to do is write an email that opens with, "There is no need to respond to this." That way one can offer support for a beleaguered colleague without putting the onus on them to reply. George Cicariello-Maher is an associate professor of politics and global studies at Drexel University in Philadelphia, and his comments about race and members of the military have ignited controversy twice within the past 6 months. The sheer volume of emails and messages overwhelms, he said. You get to the point where you know it's not your fault, you know that you're in the right, and yet you feel sort of surrounded, Mr. Cicariello-Maher said. You feel as though you're being pummeled and barraged, and especially for people who aren't used to this is a very frightening and dangerous phenomenon. While many people might offer their support or solidarity behind the scenes, Mr. Cicariello-Maher said the few do so publicly. That's why those who do and sometimes put themselves at risk are so valuable. Now, this Cicariello-Maher guy should be rendered unemployable. And I'm very serious about this. Anyone who employs him should have their business filled with phone calls, posters, and posters of his tweets, and their public image purposefully associated with the disdainful opinions of this helicopterable schmuck. I love the disingenuousness of this reporter. Oh, his comments about race got him in trouble. Yeah, he said all I want for Christmas is white genocide. Hardly just a comment about race, don't you think? And yet he's repentant. Oh yeah, you get to a point where you know it's not your fault, you know you're in the right, and you feel sort of surrounded. He genuinely believes he's in the right, calling for genocide. That is why I insist on a no mercy and no prisoners approach with these kinds of people. If this guy had been living in my area, I would have had no rest until I knew for sure that he's homeless and is going to stay homeless. And I'm not joking. Does this sound extreme? Because it is extreme. But I didn't start the fight. I didn't start the whole let's boycott everything until they agree with us trend. They did. I'm only proposing means to end this nonsense by inflicting serious damage on them and thus bring a state of mutually assured destruction. Because once they will know that this can and will happen to them, just like now many normal people know that it can and will happen to them in many environments if they happen to question the mass immigration, Islam, feminism, or some other helicopterable ideology or policy, once disdainful scum like George Cicariello-Maher know that this can and will happen to them, you will see a sudden normalization and dial back of craziness. The only reason they can afford, for now, to act in this manner is because they know nothing will happen to them. At worst, they'll get a strongly worded letter from the faculty. I mean, this guy also said that when the whites were massacred during the Haitian Revolution, that was a good thing indeed, and describes himself as a militant communist. So until there's real consequences for this, just like there are real consequences for other forms of totalitarian advocacy, this will not stop. That is why I advocate for much higher pressure and much higher level of polarization. Make them all pay. Now, although I didn't want to go through this entire article because it makes the video too long, I actually think I should because it is an impeccable insight into how these people think right now and why it is important to see them all taken down as they rightfully deserve. Quote, some academics have started trying to prep for what they see as inevitable. Virginia Rutter, a professor of sociology at the Framingham State University in Massachusetts, said that at her institution the preparation has taken the form of conversations on how to respond should one of its professors come under fire. But part of the challenge, Ms. Rutter said, is the lack of models for supporting professors who engage the public with their research. Another hurdle is that some administrators may not understand the importance of social media and why engaging with the public in that venue is worth the risk of backlash. They do not know what it means to come under the attack on Twitter or any other place. Until you have joined this culture, you don't know what this culture is, Ms. Rutter said. Patricia Matthew, an associate professor of English at Montclair State College, New Jersey, said she has started a reading list of best practices for professors and administrators dealing with digital disarray. Her efforts began, she said, after she noted the conversation between two fellow academics in which they pointed out that scholars often stick to writing strongly worded letters or petitions when their colleagues come under fire. I thought, no, we have to educate people in power, and I think colleagues who want to be allies but don't know what to do, Ms. Matthews said. Ms. Matthews is also the editor of Written/Unwritten, Diversity and the Hidden Truths of Tenure, a book about the issues facing minority faculty members, including the benefits and perils of social media. Among her pointers, she said that nitpicking what a professor said or how they said it doesn't solve the problem at hand. It's never actually about what the person said Miss Matthew. It's so easy to think, well, if they only said it in this way, or if they had only not used that term, then that wouldn't have happened. But that's just not true. Every time an administration participates in this, they're emboldening groups of people to keep at it. In cases where an instructor comes under fire, his or her administration's response can be crucial. Recriminations or suspensions could signal to outside aggressors that the strategy is working, some academics say. Outside aggressors. Outside aggressors. This is how these people view the majority of the public, as outside aggressors. Now, I've been saying this on the channel for over 2 years now, that the Academe is in a very real and literal war against human nature, normality, and the wider society. I've been called an extremist for saying that more times than I can count, but here it is, right from the horse's mouth. They quite literally see normal people taking issue with their extremist militancy as just outside aggressors. This is why I want to see them burn and why they must burn. Not physically, but professionally. Most of their professions should cease to exist. Any politician that gives even 1 cent of public shekels to these people should be tried as a traitor. Siding with any of these helicopterables should be seen at least as bad, if not significantly worse, than siding with the KKK. I mean, after all, the KKK wanted to kill fewer people than these idiots. Also, please spare me with the canard that, oh, it's only a minority of academics. No, it's not. It's not even just a minority. It's a super majority at the very least. And it's not me that's saying that. It's them. Quote, already this year, several university administrators have criticized instructors who have come under fire for things they've said, and sometimes punished them too. And at least 2 digital skirmishes this year have led to the temporary closure of campuses, Evergreen State College and Trinity College, which affects not only faculty but students, staff, and the local community. Mr. Cicariello-Maher added that continued attacks on Academe raise a question for scholars. Do they see themselves as unconnected individuals operating alone, or should a sense of solidarity exist? Some faculty think this is about a handful of individuals, Mr. Cicariello-Maher said, when in reality, it's about all of us. Now, one could say that Mr. Cicariello is exaggerating for drama effect, and there is some truth to that. Not even I believe that all academics are as super insane as he is, but I have no evidence whatsoever to believe that there are more than 20% of academics who would at least fit the non-insane category. Not non-leftist, just non-insane. I don't think there are more than a fifth, not in the humanities anyway. Ultimately, the prime purpose of this video is to tell people that yes, we all have to get more extreme when it comes to the academia, and we shouldn't be afraid of that at all. I mean, why should we? They have no problem organizing for a war against almost everyone. I mean, one of the articles quoted in this piece that I just read is this one from Tracy MC, titled Academic Outrage When the Culture Wars Go Digital, which contains advice for militant communist academics, essentially. And they make no secret of it. In one paragraph it says, quote, above all, be kind, be brave, and put your academic skills to good use, deciphering the context of recent attacks. If you read nothing else, please start with this primer for Media Matters. This isn't an issue for individual professors, this is an organized effort. Sociologists may know a little something about those. Now, Media Matters is a communist agitprop think tank. Nothing more, nothing less. And the article they reference is titled The Conservative Dark Money Groups Infiltrating Campus Politics, purporting to reference and map the funding for non-leftist student groups. Now, thankfully, they're also stupid. I mean, they say conservative dark money, but then they list the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, an obviously liberal organization funded by a bleeding heart liberal. It also lists the David Horowitz Freedom Center as a hate group. I mean, say what you want about David Horowitz, but David Horowitz spent 3/4 of his life as a militant communist. I mean, the guy is and was many things, but a hater? Give me a freaking break. Anyway, the point is that these people are openly organizing for war and have been for many years. From where I'm standing, the extremist thing to do would be to pretend this is not happening and continue to be just as polite and nice, because clearly smart people in the Academe will figure it out. No, they won't, because many of them are not even smart, and that those that are smart tend to be evil. Anyway, I'm not even the first to notice this, but more important, some have already noticed the opportunity in terms of electoral success, and they are right. Now, the article in National Review is written by what I would call a smug leftist, but nevertheless, it is mostly true, or will be mostly true if the forces of the non-left see the writing on the wall and start going militant against the academia, because the academia is a paper tiger right now. 20 years ago, saying you're with Yale, Harvard, or MIT carried some weight, or at least some relevance. Nowadays, I personally throw resumes straight into the dustbin of anyone who has a major in anything in any university west of Poland. Because from where I'm standing, educated and credentialed are on the opposite sides of the spectrum. The more credentialed you are, the more likely you are to be incredibly uneducated and a blethering fool. And look, it's not my fault that things have gone this way, but I'm sure as hell I won't be wasting my time trying to fix it. Let it all implode and burn. Creative destruction is great. We didn't try to save the typewriting machines, or the carriages, whips, or horses for that matter. We allowed creative destruction follow its course, and we're all better off thanks to it. The same is true and will be true with the Academe. And mind you, I'm not entirely privileging STEM either. The MIT publishes very insightful and technical books like Communism for Kids, in which communism is presented as something essentially good, and it's a sadness that every time it was tried, it fails miserably. And the New York Times, a former newspaper, defends all of this. So before you call me an extremist for talking, admittedly hyperbolically but also strongly, about helicopters, rotors, and academics burning, please do bear in mind that this is in response to an immense disinformation complex that has been undermining capital C civilization itself for decades, and in the process destroyed several generations of young people whose only fault is that they believed and took seriously the obviously false idea that going to college is useful and good. It's not, and it hasn't been for decades. In fact, in many university programs, one comes out of it significantly dumber than one got into. And it is high time that all of these be put out of misery. The market will take care of the rest. Starve them of shekels, shame them at every corner, mock them, ridicule them, polarize them, and make them question their own moral authority every step of the way. Oh, and protests, please. There aren't enough non-leftist protests against campuses and universities. A lot more of those are needed. Sure, there are the Berkeley fights, but it would be fabulous to have at least 3 Berkeleys a month. Not all in Berkeley, obviously. There are many other helicopterable campuses. Picket them all, mercilessly and consistently. Also, phone campaigns. Call to the administrators whenever the professors say something stupid. I know I did. I mean, it's cheap for me to call anywhere, so I usually join both the local and the international campaigns on this. And there are many others like me too. And like I said in the video about protests against CNN, the purpose of the protests is to encroach upon the establishment's moral authority. Always keep that in mind. That's how leftists cucked institutions, and that's how normal people will take them back. It's not just a way of doing things, it's the only way. Which is why I have a personal beef with those on the right who eschew activism and still cling to the moral high ground diatribe. Now that time is long gone. Being fair against an obviously unfair and yes, evil opponent is the best way to ensure a semi-honorable loss. Now, I'm sorry, but I'm not in this business to lose. I'm patient and I love long-term game and keeping a cool head, but in the end, I want victory. I want to see them begging for money for food because nobody employs dirty communists, and I want that during my lifetime. Ultimately, a hard right era is coming, and everyone knows it. It's up to each and one of us how will that era look like. And as I said 2 years ago, liberty can never win. It can only have victories. The more decisive a victory is, the more likely it is we can relax for a while. Relax, not stop. Because leftism and totalitarianism in general is on the side of entropy. But anyway, this is already getting too long, so I'll leave links in the low bar with older videos and explanations. So, what do you all think? Am I being unreasonable? I'm not going to ask if I'm being extreme. Now, that's obvious and I admitted it up front. But do you think my extreme attitude is unreasonable? And if yes, why is that? And what are the alternatives? In other words, I'm looking forward to reading criticism, but also a better alternative. I'm open to changing my mind on this actually, because as I said in the intro, this video probably comes off as far more extreme than I intended. But at the same time, nobody seems to even want to think about coming up with alternatives. And the more this purulent infection is allowed to exist, the harder will it be to clean it up. And with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. And I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.